this talk is actually abstracted from an upcoming publication, which is a feature for Linda Northrup. Some of you may know her, a really great historian of the Mamluk period who retired from University of Toronto a few years ago. And her interests were particularly in the latter part of her career. I mean, she's still working, but while she had not retired, were in medicine, in networks of knowledge, exchange, and intellectual history. So I figured I would try to say something about situating the medical commentators within specific intellectual contexts by examining their commentaries on this section, on lovesickness, a topic that clearly spans adab or belles-lettres literature, akhlaq literature, both religious and kind of political ethics kind of stuff, philosophy, Sufism, of course, and medicine. So what I hope to share today are some of the findings from this chapter, and we'll see what happens. So first, what do people usually have to say about lovesickness as far as the medical discussions are concerned? The following tweet from a younger colleague of mine, Elaine Van Dalen, on Valentine's Day of 2021, or the eve of, I should say, captures correctly the prevalent opinion, right? Which is to say that she said, even though different ideas existed about passionate love, ishq, many of which were positive, physicians did not really share this. And she captures it accurately because this is the historiography prior, including the late and much beloved Michael Doles for all his work on Majnun and other things, and Louis Giffen, who wrote an entire book on theory of profane love. The notion is that the physicians picked up from the earlier Greek tradition where lovesickness was classified as a disease and stuck to it. In their work on the malady of love, Hans Biesterfeld and Dimitri Gutas argued that the Arabic medical discussions followed the pattern and limits set by Greek accounts of lovesickness, classifying it as a species of melancholy, such that they never moved much beyond what the Greeks had. In fact, they go on to refer to the post-classical medical tradition on lovesickness as scant. What I hope to show today is that later medical commentators, in fact, engaged quite extensively with lovesickness as a condition separate from melancholy. They also moved significantly beyond what was found in the Greek and even the earlier Islamic tradition. In this, they were responding not only to the literary aspects of love discussed in poetry, etc., but also engaging in religious discussions on love, both proscriptive and prescriptive. And they came up with newer understandings of the etiology of the condition. They found a way to even explain how one could be lovesick, yet that love and its symptoms were not in need of treatment, but rather reflected a perfection of the character of the lover and that of their beloved. Using this example of lovesickness from medical texts, we can see very clearly just how situated the medical writers were within their larger intellectual contexts, and that they were well versed in philosophy among with many other sciences, at least this subset of physicians whose texts were very, very widely read. So it's fair to say that even there's those who are reading it. Negating, of course, a strong strand in the historiography that suggests that medicine went into decline after 1200 in Islamic societies. These medical discussions instead reveal a vibrant post-classical intellectual climate wherein scholars challenged and refined received doctrines and ideas, supporting the findings of other intellectual historians of the post-classical period in fields as diverse as philosophy, astronomy, natural sciences, mathematics, etc. Law, Sufism, I can go on, right? Of course, in order to understand what was precisely novel in the subsequent period, we need a better understanding of what was actually there in the earlier period. Chapters on ishq as lovesickness are actually a common feature of Arabic medical encyclopedias even before 1200. And we'll discuss some of them here, particularly Abu Bakr al-Razi and Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina's discussions are also far more detailed than what is found in Paul of Aegina's short chapter on lovesickness in Greek, which was translated into Arabic during the 8th and 9th centuries, or at least available in some form in Arabic. Ibn Sina and al-Razi not only elaborate upon the causes and symptoms of the condition, but also offer novel treatments, such as Ibn Sina's suggestion to employ old women or mukhannithun or effeminates to mock the beloved in front of the lover. And I would suggest that it's because both al-Razi and Ibn Sina are already immersed in debates on ishq as passionate love at the same time, within the adab literature and other contexts. Yet the discussion in the post 1200 post-classical period moves significantly beyond that, particularly thanks to Ibn Nafis's interventions and what follows after. And here's a list of the people I'll be talking about, focusing mainly after Ibn Nafis, but I'll give enough of the background on Al-Majusi and others. Okay. So ishq as lovesickness is characterized quite simply as a disease in need of treatment by Al-Majusi in his Kitab al-Mansuri, the royal book. No, I got that one. Kitab al-Maliki, the royal book. Al-Mansuri is Razi's book. Al-Majusi calls it the drought of the soul, huyam an-nafs, one's unquenchable thirst for the beloved, wherein one constantly thinks about him or her. The disease's symptoms include sunken eyes, rapid eye movement, emaciation, getting thin, and a change in the pulse when the beloved's name is mentioned. For treatment, Al-Majusi recommends a moist regimen, including baths, massages, and moist drinks such as wine. He also recommends keeping the lover busy so that he is distracted from thinking about the ma'shuq or the beloved. The lover can be kept busy with routine work and activities, or with music, poetry, and even stories about the Zahid or the Zohd. The ascetics, right? Finally, sexual intercourse with someone other than the beloved is deemed beneficial for the lovesick lover. Al-Majusi, as the presentation just hopefully showed, is not judgmental about this disease, right? He's just saying that this is what it is. It's embedded within entirely a discussion of melancholy in the Greek, coming out of the Greek tradition. And in fact, Al-Majusi relies almost exclusively on filtering in all of that material from the Greek tradition, without taking into account any reference to local cultural or literary analyses or anything of that order, of ishq as obsessive love. Since these practices inform the medical discussions of ishq as lovesickness of Abu Bakr al-Razi and Ibn Sina as the successor, it is worth providing a quick overview of the discourse on ishq as obsessive, passionate love, and the controversy surrounding it in contemporary works of belles-lettres like Ibn Ahmad al-Washa and others. But the Al-Majusi, I hope it was clear also, is not judgmental, but the disease is a disease. It's not a positive condition, it's a negative condition that requires treatment. That's all he has to say. Although love was a prevalent theme in pre-Islamic Arabic poetry, it was in the Umayyad period that a new form, the ghazal, emerged entirely dedicated to love. The new conventions and styles of this love poetry, along with its reuse of earlier conventions, were aided and disseminated through the art of singing. In fact, the first two treatises known to be composed on Arabic quote-unquote love theory, this is Lewis Giffen's term, but the idea is that you talk a lot about love, are from the 9th century Abbasid theologian literature, Al-Jahidh, one of which is entitled Risalat al-Qiyan, the treatise on singing slave girls. And in fact, the majority of the Abbasid source material that we have for ghazal poetry from the earlier period is the Kitab al-Aghani as well, right, the book of songs. As Joha al-Harthi has recently shown, even though Umayyad love poetry is usually divided into udhri, or chaste Bedouin poetry, and the sensual urban sarih poetry, the difference between the two is not clear. Poets seen as representative of each actually describe ishq as passionate love, both whether requited or unrequited, and both sets of poets did not shy away from sensual descriptions of their beloveds. Nonetheless, the distinction between the chaste love of the Urdri poets and the sensual libertine love of the Mujun poets crystallized a little later in the 10th and the 11th centuries, Abbasid literature. There was a tendency amongst these writers, many writers, such as Al-Washa, to idealize the chaste Urdri love of the love of the Urdri poets against the Mujun poets of his time, who he saw as reveling in sexuality, wine, and other immoral activities. Al-Washa and his contemporaries claimed that the zarif, the well-refined person, was one who was elegant, witty, and one who constantly felt the pangs of ishq or passionate love, though he remained chaste always and never gave in to lewdness, unlike the mujan, the libertines of his time. Abu Bakr al-Razi was clearly responding to these mujun, or mujan, the mujun literature, in his chapter on ishq, in his the book on spiritual medicine, At-Tib al-Ruhani, right? This is a standalone chapter on ishq. It's not exclusive to ishq. He talks about a couple of other conditions too, but ishq is a big part of the chapter. In the medical work, even though he does not address it in any of his other works, or if he does, his works are pretty copious, and we haven't found it, or more than me haven't found it yet. Al-Razi, of course, claims the following: that people who are endowed with lofty purposes and exalted souls, as well as those who busy themselves with serious activities, whether religious or secular, distance themselves from ishq. On the other hand, effeminate, khanithun, the leisurely people, faragh, those who live luxuriously and are beholden to desires, are those who are generally afflicted with ishq, especially when they pore over the stories of lovers and recite the tender love poems and listen to the affecting melodies and songs. He claims that the lovers are worse than even animals, since they constantly gratify their lust for sex and are never content with it. In fact, their lack of contentment and their obedience to and worship of pleasure and desire lead them to suffer constantly from agony, anguish, insomnia, and undernourishment, which in turn leads many of them to a state of madness, junoon, and delusion, waswas. Al-Razi intriguingly slams here not only the libertines themselves who are doing this, but even the others who are trying to distinguish udhri, or proper chaste love, from that of the libertines. So he's really mocking Washa here. He doesn't name him. He says, those who assert that ishq is a quality of the person who is zarif, he calls them, and says that by calling the love the sole habit of refined natures and subtle brains, people like Ibn Washa and others are being silly, right? The very fact that philosophers and learned people do not succumb to this malady, while the Arab Bedouins, the Kurds, the Nabateans, and their like do, shows that love is in fact the habit of gross natures and stupid minds. Al-Razi concludes that people who do not think or deliberate much, but rather give in to their desires and carnal appetites easily, are those who are afflicted with lovesickness. And as for those who defend the virtues of ishq by highlighting that even prophets were afflicted by it, Al-Razi argues that a prophet's falling in love is to be counted as one of his faults and slips, not one of his merits or virtues. And one should emulate only those actions of virtuous men which they found pleasing and approved in themselves and desired that others should imitate, not their slips, which they regretted and of which they repented, wishing they had never happened or committed them. The negativity towards ishq in Razi's medical work is palpable and goes far beyond what is found in the Greek corpus because it is rooted in his local context. The negative portrayal of ishq is not limited to Razi in this period, even though later Sufis adopted ishq as madhab ishq and everything that many people are familiar with, as a metaphor for the love of God, particularly the chaste type of ishq of the udhri poetry, with its emphasis on overpowering love and the lover's acceptance of any fate, including death. This was not common in the early Abbasid period. Theologians rejected the use of ishq in reference to love of God, preferring hub and mahabba, precisely because of ishq's association with sensuality and lust. Central books of Sufism, like that of Al-Qushayri, followed suit in refusing to characterize the divine love of the divine or that of the human for the divine or the divine's love itself using ishq. The theologians and Sufis of this period argued that since ishq in its essence is used to characterize a love that transgresses all limits, one cannot use that term in relationship to the divine in any form. The position that ishq is the highest degree in completion of love will only gradually take hold among Sufis from the 12th century onwards, after Ahmad al-Ghazali's Samani al-Ushaq, and then of course Madhab Ishq, in which the whole of creation was presented as an unfolding aspect of love, becomes quite common. However, what we see is of course some echoes of that in Ibn Sina's philosophical corpus, and even though it's a mainstay of Sufism after 1200, but that's the echo I want to now go into in Ibn Sina's work. So, in his treatise on the essence of love, Risala fi Mahiyat al-Ishq, Ibn Sina espouses such a positive view of ishq as love that earlier scholars have termed it an apology for the views of earlier belletrists who defended the chaste ishq. Against Al-Razi, whom he does not name, Ibn Sina not only cites a prophetic tradition in support of loving beautiful faces, but even suggests that philosophers are never free from having their hearts occupied with a beautiful human form. Human form, not divine, right? Crucial in that. He distinguishes between the purely carnal love of the animal soul and for a beautiful form, and the love that arises from a combination of both the animal and the rational souls, And he concurs with the Razi that the former is hideous, the one that's just purely based on lust, but the latter can be ennobling and a sign of refinement, fatan zarif, as long as one guards against it becoming excessively lustful. To that end, Ibn Sina validates the enjoyment that comes from uniting with a beloved, even if it involves embracing, kissing, and sexual union, as long as the union is within the bounds of religious law. The treatise on essence of love is meant to show that the role played by love in the cosmic order itself, and again, a human being's love for another human is part of that cosmic order and goes and builds into it, right? So that's what I mean as a positive one, and with an element of what's going to show up later as part of his text. And thus, apart from critiquing the excessive lustful love of an unchecked animal soul, Ibn Sina gives a highly positive account. However, in his medical encyclopedia, the Qanun, he's forced to reckon with ishq as a sickness, as a malady. So, does he reconcile these two opposing views? At first glance, it seems not. Ibn Sina defines ishq as a marad waswasi, a delusionary illness that resembles melancholy. Note, resembles melancholy, not melancholy. It is a condition that a person brings upon himself by letting his reasoning be overpowered by finding pleasure in certain forms and qualities that belong to the beloved. Ibn Sina lists all the symptoms of lovesickness found in Al-Razi and Majusi's works: sunken eyes, rapid eye movement, insomnia, emaciation. He also has a few more symptoms that fit with the overall understanding of this condition regarding the particular type of pulse. His treatment recommendations also echo those found in Al-Majusi's text, such as moistening regimens and sexual union with the beloved, whose efficacy Ibn Sina exclaims he personally witnessed in a lovesick lover who, upon uniting with his beloved, recovered his health very quickly after having been extremely weak. He states that he recognized at that point how much a person's physical nature, their tabi'ah, is subordinated to psychic phantasms, al-awham and nafsaniya. He also recommends determining whether the condition is a result of a burnt humor or not, and this is the brief reference he makes to a possibility that black bile could give rise to it, although he doesn't mention black bile. Finally, agreeing with Al-Razi and Al-Majusi, Ibn Sina recommends that the lover's mind should be kept occupied so that they forget about the beloved. Most of the canon's discussion of ishq thus seems to portray ishq if not judgmentally, but certainly negatively. However, Ibn Sina departs from his predecessors in one key way, which results in some of his novel treatment recommendations. Immediately after describing how a person brings this illness upon themselves by entirely being consumed in thinking about the beloved, Ibn Sina adds, then his lustful desire either assists him in that, or it does not. Right? I think I got the Arabic right, but ثُمَّ أَعَانَتَهُ عَلَى ذَلِكَ شَهْوَتُهُ أَوْ لَمْ تَعُنْ. Right? Ibn Sina here distinguishes between the carnal, condonable ishq of the common folk and the non-carnal, commendable ishq of the elite, whose love of beautiful forms, as per the treatise on love, arises from the animal and rational parts of the soul. The shahwa is absent in the commendable ishq of the rational soul, as described in the treatise, though it can arise if unchecked embracing and kissing takes on. The canon's view of ishq is thus not wholly negative, and this small concession, we'll see, allows subsequent commentators to really delve into. Nonetheless, Ibn Sina recognized in this treatise too that the commendable rational ishq can morph into the abominable kind, so he provides the treatment regimen in the canon itself for these elite people. He goes, to treat lovesickness amongst the rational folk, one should advise them, rebuke them, ridicule them, and deliver moral exhortations that make them realize that the phantasms in their minds are only delusions and a kind of madness. The canon's discussion of ishq as lovesickness thus continues to defend and validate to some extent the views on ishq as passionate love of the belles lettres and the social, cultural, and emerging religious practices of Ibn Sina against Abu Bakr al-Razi's criticisms. And in defending these practices, Ibn Sina introduces many novel aspects in basically understanding and treating ishq as lovesickness that inform subsequent discussions. So, I'm going to now move on to my post-classical folks after that intro on the hill. All right, Ibn Nafis. So, like Ibn Sina and Al-Razi, Ibn Nafis doesn't really need much of an introduction. The leading Mamluk, early Mamluk period physician, not only the first person to challenge Galenic cardiovascular anatomy, but also the first to compose a lemmatic commentary on all 5 books of the canon. No one else had done that in terms of passage by passage. He's the first one to do it. I'm not even sure anyone else did it after that. He's also credited with being the author of the widely acclaimed Mujiz, the epitome, or the popular abridgment of the canon. Ibn Nafis divides his commentary in the section on ishq from the canon into 3 investigations. The first is on the mahiyat, or the essence of lovesickness. He begins his discussion by acknowledging the difference of opinion that exists in Islamic societies and literature concerning ishq. And he says, some people do not classify it as a disease, or the majority do. He sides with those who classify it as a disease. Right? And the reason he says is because the actions of the cogitative faculty, af'al al-fikr, in this condition deviate from their natural course, since a lover is only serious about turning their thoughts towards a specific person and their characteristics. He agrees with Ibn Sina that lovesickness resembles melancholy only to a degree, since excessive love or hate or desire is characteristic of melancholics, as are the symptoms of sleeplessness and sorrow. However, moving beyond Ibn Sina, Ibn Nafis explains how lovesickness differs from melancholy. He actually says, melancholy is connected to a contraction of the soul, sorrow, constriction of the chest, hatred of people, while lovesickness is connected to pleasure, expansion, and joy, especially at the time of union. Moreover, lovesickness, he says, resembles foolishness, since one's thoughts are turned away from matters that require immediate attention. In short, lovesickness is indeed for Ibn Nafis an entirely own category of disease, and not at all like the Greeks, a subcategory of melancholy. Ibn Nafis then makes a number of key interventions. First, he says, know that the ishq that a person does not bring upon himself in this way, but rather happens suddenly, baghtatan, and without the intention of the lover, وَمِنْ غَيْرِ قَصْدٍ مِنَ الْعَاشِقِ, is very strong. It is known as hayman, madly in love, while sometimes it is also called junoon. This strongly resembles melancholy. Again, strongly resembles, but is not. By raising the issue of the voluntary versus involuntary nature of ishq, Ibn Nafis here is inserting himself into a long-standing debate within the literature of love and religious discussions on this issue. Across the Arabic writings, from Al-Jahiz to Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah in very many different registers, ishq as passionate love was deemed to be a specific kind of hubb, which is why, as stated earlier, Sufis had walked away from it originally. That one could unknowingly and unintentionally fall in hubb, or love, muhabba, at first sight was accepted widely. On the other hand, it seemed far-fetched to some to suggest that a condition in which one obsesses constantly over the forms of a beloved, such that the lover goes mad, could arise involuntarily. Right? Authors on profane love provided numerous anecdotes, yet authors on profane love still provided anecdotes to support this claim. Surprisingly, even Ibn al-Jawzi, who otherwise criticizes ishq, still provides an anecdote where a woman is suggested to have fallen madly in love completely involuntarily. In that case, he uses the term hawa. And Fakhruddin al-Razi goes even further by claiming that the Prophet Yaqub's greater love for his sons Yusuf and Binyamin over the others was excusable, since, now he uses again muhabba, is not in the power of a human, right? Nonetheless, the theorists were not willing to go far in condoning obsessive love, ishq, right? That was the key. The opponents of this view argued that even if one falls in love, muhabba, with someone at first sight, one still has control over not to continuously obsess over them, right? And if you have continuously done so and fallen in ishq, that's your problem, right? This wasn't involuntary. It is thus intriguing that Ibn Nafis, a physician who defines ishq as a disease where one constantly obsesses over someone, accepts the possibility that it can be involuntary, right? And the fact that Ibn Sina and his predecessors did not consider this possibility shows the kind of novel notions that are evolving within it. Ibn Nafis sides with Ibn Sina that sometimes lovesickness is not accompanied by a desire for sexual union either. He in fact goes further and suggests that non-sexual ishq in most cases is quite intense and deep-seated. He thus continues down Ibn Sina's path of redeeming some types of ishq over and against the critics. Earlier authors, of course, had assigned many physical symptoms to lovesickness that we've talked about, yet they focused on its mental cause rather than a physiological cause. And here again, Ibn Nafis jumps in, and I mean by not the burnt humor, melancholy, black bile stuff, but like any other physiological cause. Ibn Nafis changes that by devoting a long passage to the physiological cause of lovesickness, which also helps him incorporate Abu Bakr al-Razi's negative description of lovesick, and possibly the involuntary nature too, although he doesn't spell that out. He says, I believe that the cause of lovesickness is the retention of semen. Many, and in this case it's common to both men and women, as far as Ibn Nafis and that medical tradition is concerned, which gives rise to bad vapors, though not to the extent of being poisonous. These vapors harm the brain, resulting in the aforementioned action, unnatural action of the cogitative faculty. This is why one returns to health quickly with frequent sexual intercourse. Notice that Ibn Nafis recognizes that his physiological explanation for what causes lovesickness is novel, the use of the I believe. By stating that lovesickness is physically caused by the buildup of semen and the bad vapors that arise, he can provide a physiological explanation for why sexual union works, which of course also works for those people who had claimed the burnt and corrupt black bile. However, Ibn Nafis can go even further and provide physiological reasons for why certain groups of people are more prone to lovesickness than others. So he states that because lovesickness is caused by a buildup of semen, it affects the unmarried, al-uzab, and the youth, fityan, much more, not exclusively, both of whom have limited, if any, opportunities to have sex. He also adds that lovesickness occurs frequently amongst desert-dwelling Arabs, echoing Abu Bakr al-Razi's claim. However, rather than diminishing this high incidence as a result of base passions or unintelligent folks, Ibn Nafis provides an explanation that also establishes the moral superiority of Arabs. He explains that strict Arab codes of honor prevent them from committing zina. So when they're afflicted by ishq, in most cases it is very severe. It is because they cannot have sex with whom they love, most of the time, and they cannot have sex with other than their beloveds because their lustful desires, their shahawat, are not so inclined. Ibn Nafis thus defends the ishq as passionate love, lovesickness, and undergirds the volumes of poetry and anecdotes of the pre-Islamic Arabic poetry without belittling Arab morality or intellect. Although he does not bring up the debate over the involuntary-voluntary nature of love here, it is possible that his allusion to the greater intensity of the Arab nomad's lovesickness is meant to suggest that the unmarried or young Arab desert dwellers fall madly in love due to physical and moral constraints, right, in terms of the build-up theory that he has. Ibn Nafis concludes his investigation on nature of the lovesickness by highlighting two more groups of people who are prone, he says, to the ailment: ignoble young men and the idle folk. The former are prone to lovesickness because they neglect important responsibilities and are shameless by their nature in pursuit of lust, whereas the latter because they're least concerned with the theoretical arts and exigent matters. So there's overlap in terms of the definition, and keeping them occupied is a way to remove stuff. None of these four groups, al-uzab, al-fityan, al-ra'a, and al-batalun, as groups of people per se, are mentioned in the canon source text as those who are afflicted by ishq. And as indicated earlier, his groups overlap, but only partially, with those of Abu Bakr al-Razi, since al-Razi does not correlate one's propensity to fall in love to one's age or stage in life. Subsequent medical commentators will adopt Ibn Nafis's categories because they show up in the Epitome's brief discussion. I'm going to quickly breeze over the second and third investigations of Ibn Nafis's commentary. Basically, the second investigation doesn't do much. It's explanatory and rearranges the symptoms. Doesn't add anything new. The third one is all he says, yes, the treatment works, but he says the best treatment afdal is sex. Right, and then he kind of lets the rest of it be, and it kind of makes sense with his physiological explanation. Right. The epitome of the canon of medicine has a very brief section on ishq, which largely summarizes the canon's account of the illness, but also updates it in one crucial respect based on Ibn Nafis's commentary. And you can see it over here. Right, he brings in the categories of the people: the unmarried, the idle folk, the ignoble young men, right, as the one in the fityan will get picked up by others. Right, but it also says it's another species of melancholy, so it's kind of going back even away from Ibn Sina in one category, and the rest of it is. So it's an interesting text, which I can discuss more in the question and answer session as to my current thoughts on what's going on with the mujas. All right, so catching up. The commentators, when the commentators on the epitome had this text to deal with, and the canon and other stuff, and what's going on with their works, right? So I'm going to examine three of them. Sadid ad-Din al-Kazaruni from the outskirts of Shiraz, right, wrote a very famous commentary, the Mughni, as he called it, the ultimate commentary on the epitome, right? The goal was to free practicing physicians from the need to consult any other medical work ever. Consequently, he often included material from earlier medical works into his text. Right? Al-Kazaruni begins his commentary by actually citing a pseudo-Hippocratic work on the malady of love that Biesterfeld and Gutas, in fact, had translated. And what's fascinating about Al-Kazaruni's inclusion of that is that it's usually not found in medical works. It's found in nomological literature and kind of religious works. So why does he do that? I have two possible explanations. First, the pseudo-Hippocratic text attributes lovesickness to a metaphorical burning desire in the heart that physically burns the blood and humors, turning them into corrupt black bile. The Mujas refers to a species of melancholy, and this, for me, is a way of Al-Kazaruni bringing that text in as a way to explain why it could be a species of melancholy, possibly. Second possibility, Al-Khazaruni is from Qutbuddin Shirazi's circle, and they are very much enamored with kind of ancient knowledge and kind of at least using that trope of the ancients, right? And the fact that this is a Hippocratic text, there could be an antiquarian reason to kind of justify particular kinds of text that's going on. His link to, of course, Shirazi also helps explain Al-Khazaruni's comments on the type of love sickness that is not accompanied by sexual desire. Here, Al-Khazaruni clarifies that the one that is not accompanied by a desire, and I have the passage, I'm not going to read through it, but basically where he says what is sought is unrestricted gazing and not penetration or marriage. Al-Khazaruni goes, as you can see in this passage, much further than Ibn Sina or Ibn Nafis in incorporating Sufi conceptions of love within the medical text. The use of the term Arifin, Gnostics, in this context harkens directly back to Madhhab ʿIshq and the kind of stuff that's emerging, which was very much entrenched in the Sufi thought of his time and widely followed by many of his contemporaries. In fact, Al-Khazaruni, Qutbuddin Shirazi, of course, has ijazats and is in the illuminationist kind of tradition in any case. And two of the leaders of Suhrawardi's Sufi order are from Khazarun as well, and there was a famous established one, so you can see a deep connection in that case. Khazaruni goes to say that it may even be possible for the non-ignoble firq to transfer their type of majazi ishq, that is not accompanied by sexual desire, into a haqiqi ishq by purifying one's soul and ascending to the ranks of the Gnostics, madarij al-arifin, right, in this passage. The latter do not concern themselves with anything in this world, but rather their desire in the utmost limit of their thought is the knowledge of the first truth that originated the whole, the God of every intellect and soul, whose lordship is majestic, etc. Right? Not only, of course, is he harkening back to illumination and Sufist traditions, Suhrawardi Sufi traditions, etc., and Suhrawardi in particular, because his discussion of gazing seems to very much refer to Shahidbazi, right, which is something associated or usually associated with, I forget now, I'm blanking out on the name and I don't have the full notes, the second qutb, I guess, on Suhrawardi's order, who was famous for practicing Shahidbazi, or at least is referred to have done that. I'm blanking out on his name, sorry about that. We thus see a much deeper interpenetration of the two notions of ishq, the first the medical melody of love, and the second the praiseworthy love of the divine, which the mystics undertake. Yet precisely because the latter is still understood as a type of ishq, it can cause possibly medical symptoms, although he doesn't describe it. He says it's certainly not blameworthy at all, and we'll see more in Ibn al-Mubarak's commentary as to where he goes. In terms of the physiological cause, Al-Khazaruni, of course, plops the pseudo-Hippocratic text, so he's referring to black bile. But there's one place where he actually also refers back to Ibn Nafis's new notion, right? While dealing with the section on abundant sexual intercourse for treating the lovesick, Al-Khazaruni explains that frequent sexual intercourse helps, even with other than the beloved, because it evacuates the thick semen that has accumulated since the lover has been celibate, and this evacuation breaks down the corrupt vapors, right? So that's a direct allusion to Ibn Nafis's new idea. The second commentator, Nafis ibn Abd al-Kirmani's commentary in the Epitome, shows no engagement from the material from Al-Khazaruni. From what we know, he may not have had access to it. The commentary was begun by by Al-Kirmani in Kirman, but completed in 1438 at the court of Ulugh Beg in Samarkand, to whom he also dedicated the work. As I've shown elsewhere, Al-Kirmani actually relies on his own commentary on Jamal ad-Din al-Aqsarai's earlier commentary, the Hal al-Mujaz. But Aqsarai is really more of a religious scholar. He has very little to say on practical medical discussions, right? And so he has nothing to say here. It's basically all Al-Kirmani in this case. Al-Kirmani reveals his familiarity with Ibn Nafis's original discussion of lovesickness very early on. While glossing the Epitome's phrase that ishq is another species of melancholy, Al-Kirmani explains that it is counted as a species of melancholy only because it leads to sleeplessness and weeping, because the lover's thoughts deviate excessively from their natural course and towards an excessive desire for the union. He does not himself believe it is a species of melancholy, right? I mean, that's sort of clear through the passage. He also uses Ibn Nafis's commentary frequently while commenting on the rest of the Epitome. He explains that lovesickness afflicts the unmarried, because semen is retained in them, which changes and gives off bad vapors, not quite poisonous, that rise to the brain, changing its actions for the worse. Pretty much a quote from Ibn Nafis's text. Thus, unlike Al-Khazaruni, Al-Kirmani is firmly committed to Ibn Nafis's new physiological explanation for lovesickness, which he highlights again at the end of the commentary in a section of why sexual intercourse with anyone, not just a beloved, can help. He also agrees with Ibn Nafis that ishq can happen baghtatan, suddenly, right, without the intention qasd of the lover. Though like his predecessor, he does not provide any examples of that. Noticeably though, Al-Kirmani does not claim, unlike Ibn Nafis, that the unintended ishq is more deeply rooted. Similarly, he merely notes that sometimes ishq is not accompanied by a desire for sexual intercourse due to the morally upright habits of a person in their healthy state. He does not associate this or any other kind of love with Sufi mystics or any other kind of elites. He's not always beholden to what Ibn Sina or Ibn Nafis have to say. For example, Al-Kirmani feels that the advice and mocking the beloved can help treat a rational lovesick lover only if the ishq has not firmly established in them. Similarly, he adds that if old women are unsuccessful in turning away the lover from their beloved by mocking and mimicking the beloved, they need to adopt a different course while making it obvious that they're not concealing the beloved from the lovesick lover, for many lovers take comfort in that, i.e. that the beloved is being prevented from uniting with the lovesick lover because of the people and not in themselves. The latter is perhaps a nod to common literary tropes that we see in literature, though he does not say much more. He doesn't cite any passage or personal experience. We do not know enough about his life as yet, beyond presenting his medical commentaries to Ulugh Beg in Samarkand, to be able to situate some of the subtleties and modifications further within his milieu. All right, the final commentator, and then hopefully I can conclude within 40 minutes. So, Ibn Mubarak's subsequent discussion of lovesickness in his commentary is perhaps the most novel in the medical tradition, both for bringing in his personal experience and for wrestling through thoroughly with this tension among ishq as divine love, or ishq as carnal love, and of course ishq as a medical illness, lovesickness, which of course has been present for a long time, but and treated differently. Al-Khazaruni, we saw, had tried to resolve the tension by praising the haqiqi ishq of the Gnostics, but he did not explicitly exclude this type of ishq from being treated as a medical malady, nor did he try to address whether or not Gnostics and the rational and spiritual elite experience any of the medical symptoms. Ibn Mubarak will do so. Ibn Mubarak came from a family of physicians, and in the last decades of his life served as at the court of Sultan Salim I and Sultan Suleiman in Istanbul. Earlier, he had studied in Shiraz under Jalaluddin Dawani, a leading scholar of the rational and religious sciences, trained in the religious sciences like fiqh and hadith. Al-Dawani, and of course, could trace his philosophical lineages through teachers to Ibn Sina himself. More crucially for our understanding of Ibn al-Mubarak's intellectual context, Al-Dawani was a practicing Sufi in the Murshidiyya Silsila of Khazarun. And he was also well versed in the works of Shihab ad-Din al-Suhrawardi, whose primer on Hikmat al-Ishraq he taught to students. Ibn Mubarak's commitment to illumination as thought is actually apparent very early. He begins his commentary by providing a lexical meaning of ishq, right? Now, on the one hand, this is pretty common. A lot of dictionaries provide that, a lot of religious texts provide that. What texts don't provide that? No medical commentary does that, right? At least the ones that I've looked at. Maybe there's some hiding that I haven't looked at yet, right? So this is odd. Why begin? Now, it seems to be pretty standard in terms of many of these other commentaries too. Lexical dictionaries and religious works, right? They always make the connection between ishq and a plant called ashaqa. The plant has some various characteristics, but they're not always identical. And of course, there are very many similarities across them. But what really is distinct about Ibn Mubarak, and that's why he cites that sher as well, is that ishq dries up a fresh, succulent heart and body. Right, that's his focus, hence the share on that too. And this precise understanding of the plant is found in As-Suhrawardi's Persian treatise, Fi Haqiqat al-Ishq. And that's Suhrawardi's passage, right? Pretty much the same thing, where of course he's going to talk about all the nourishment that reaches the tree through water and air. It plunders until the tree withers, right? Khushk shoot. As-Suhrawardi's emphasis is entirely on the vine suffocating the tree of moisture, food, and air. The imagery accords well with the all-consuming aspect of ishq as lovesickness. as we have seen characterized in the medical tradition. Ibn Mubarak's familiarity with both the Suhrawardian corpus and the medical tradition led him to see this much closer correspondence, which explains why he adopted this etymology over all others. But it's also a hint as to that this Persian treatise, fi haqiqat al-ishq, is going to play a substantial role in the rest of the medical commentary too. Another striking feature of Ibn Mubarak's commentary on this section is his frequent use of Quranic verses. So he says love is like the fire of God kindled which leaps over our hearts. He says the treatment of busying them with matters works because God has not assigned to any man two hearts within his body, right? And this unabashed use of Quranic verses that never refer to the word ishq, which is what the religious scholars would always trumpet and say that's why you're using it incorrectly, right? He seems to have no problems with it, right? And provides all along. Ibn Mubarak, like Al-Kirmani, with whose commentary he was intimately familiar, so Ibn Mubarak does know Al-Kirmani and Kazanuni's commentary. He accepts Ibn Nafis's novel explanation that lovesickness arises from a retention of semen, which is why the unmarried and juveniles are prone to it. He also forcefully defends Ibn Nafis's assertion that one may become lovesick unintentionally, right? And he actually has a long passage on it, relatively speaking, right? Which I can read. We have only said, that most of the time it is due to that, but not all the time, because it may happen all of a sudden, because from an unintended glance or from hearing something beautiful. For it is said that the ear falls in love before the eye sometimes, which is why it can happen to blind people. And then he gives an anecdote of a blind man falling in love with a young adolescent boy, a sabiyan, right, whom he could distinguish from the other from his scent. So sound, scent, all of that making its way. It is important to recognize that Ibn Mubarak defends the unintentionality of ishq while commenting on the medical definition again, that it is caused by excessive thinking, right? And it's the medical definition that's used by people like Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah to say, see, it cannot be in. So we have this fascinating interplay going on between the texts. Ibn Mubarak reignites the debate by citing his personal experience, of course, with this blind man. The most unique aspect, however, of Ibn Mubarak's commentary in my last passage before concluding is his continuous use of the Quranic account of the Prophet Yaqub's ishq for his son, Yusuf. An account that was rarely used, even in Sufi contexts, of ishq, right? As opposed to Zulaykha and Yusuf, which is used quite abundantly. Right. In his monumental Quranic exegesis, Fakhruddin al-Razi, for example, glosses the phrase shaghafaha hubban when used to describe Zulaykha's loving desire for Yusuf in several ways, all of which carry the connotation of love that surrounds and overwhelms the heart. By contrast, he never uses those similar connotations when describing Yaqub's love for and the incessant weeping with regards to Yusuf. Similarly, Ibn Qayyim, who never feels the need to defend Yaqub's love for Yusuf against the proponents of ishq, right, suggesting that it was not widely circulated in this time. It was not something people were talking about. As opposed to the Prophet's love for Zainab, which was being used. And Ibn Qayyim really plops that into the discussion and wants to make a distinction. That's not ishq of the kind that people are thinking about. So Ibn al-Mubarak unabashedly cites the example of Prophet Yaqub's love for his son numerous times in his commentary. He explains the mujiz matan of the eyes of a lover are hollow and dry except while weeping, and he says, like Prophet Yaqub, and he says in a number of other times as well, including he says, rational folk may be treated by admonishing and advising them, although he says sometimes the advice does not benefit them, and he then cites the verses on both Prophet Yaqub and Zulaykha, right, in this context. In fact, he offers Prophet Yaqub as a counterexample to the Mujiz's claim that the lovesick generally afflicts the unmarried, idle, juveniles, and ignorant folk. And he says, it actually may afflict the most noble people, as it afflicted Yaqub, peace be upon him. This type of lovesickness that afflicts people like him, right, as he says, is not a type of melancholy. Even if it were a type of melancholy, it is not in one need of treatment and of correcting the temperament, but rather it is a source of correct conduct, not in need of correction, right? So Ibn Mubarak's highlighting of Yaqub's ishq fits, of course, perfectly with the Suhrawardi's use of the trio of Yaqub for sorrow, Zulaykha for love, and Yusuf for beauty in precisely that treatise on the reality of ishq, to explain the path of the illuminationist philosopher mystic. Interestingly, Ibn Mubarak believes that the mystic's haqiqi, non-covetous ishq can give rise to the medical symptoms of lovesickness. right? This is apparent in the passage quoted above, where he says that even a noble person's lovesickness is like that of melancholy. It is not in need of treatment. Nowhere does he suggest that their ishq itself should not be classified as lovesickness. In fact, he provides the longest commentary on the phrase, sometimes it is not accompanied by a desire for sexual intercourse. Here he says this may be due to the iffa, virtuosity of the lover, or due to li kamal husn al ma'shuq, due to the perfection of the beauty of the beloved, for these make the lover forget the desire for intercourse. However, this is not the case when neither the lover possesses virtuosity prior to falling in love, nor does the beloved possess perfect beauty. The mystical lover is one whose lovesickness does not entail sexual desires like that of Yaqub, and the perfection of the beloved, or due to his own virtuosity like that of Yaqub, or the perfection of the beloved, i.e. the divine beauty. Even if he suffers from the symptoms of lovesickness, these are not meant to be alleviated by anyone other than God, or as Ahmad al-Ghazali would put it, suffering is what is essential in love and comfort is borrowed. So, to conclude, sorry for going a bit over, scholarly studies on love have long recognized the incorporation of philosophical and medical understandings in the religious and literary discourses, starting from Ibn Dawood's Kitab al-Zahra all the way down. That the medical texts were as grounded in contemporary religious, philosophical, and literary discourses has received less attention. As we have seen, the various engagements with contemporary discourses led medical writers to revise considerably their understanding of lovesickness, its causes, its symptoms, and treatments. Galenic and other Hellenistic philosophical and medical works laid the foundation, but the discussions did not remain within the Greek confines as has commonly been assumed. Ibn Sina already introduced some novel elements, but Ibn Nafis truly put it on a new fitting and a non-Galenic impetus to discussions on lovesickness. And it was in his shadow, cast wide thanks to the popularity of the epitome during the post-classical period, that subsequent commentators like Kazaruni and Ibn al-Mubarak worked and made their own contributions. Once we recognize that the medical discussions evolved over time due to developments within and outside their discipline, we can re-examine the post-classical religious and literary discussions to see how they were responding to changes in the medical discussions, instead of seeing the former as merely responding to Sufi discourses and social practices related to ishq against a static medical theoretical background. A good example here is actually Ibn Abi Hajala's Diwan al-Sababa, who includes Ibn Nafis's new physiological understanding of ishq as lovesickness due to semen retention, and claims that ishq is sometimes voluntary and sometimes involuntary. Right? Finally, many of the authors of these medical works were not only practicing physicians, but members of the courts of rulers. They were trained in a variety of sciences and grounded in larger social intellectual contexts. They were part of important philosophical and religious networks that clearly influenced their thinking. These influences would need to be explored further if we are to gain a better understanding and appreciation for the evolving nature of medical theory and practice in the post-classical period. Thank you.